So this is not the kind of film I'd normally see. I mean, not every movie I watch is a horror movie or a sci-fi movie or a fantasy movie or something like that. But in general, I avoid sports movies, and this is ostensibly a sports movie, like The Plague, especially things like racing movies, because I honestly can't think of anything I find more boring than auto racing. It's definitely up there, with like golf on the list of things that I just find unbearable to watch. But what kind of interested me in this movie was a couple things. Firstly, Christian Bale's in it. Christian Bale is just awesome. He pretty much always does a great job. It's almost worth watching a movie with him in it just to see him doing a really eccentric, over the top performance, and he delivered in this. So that looked good. Also, it got nominated for a bunch of awards. Now, I don't put a lot of stock in, obviously, the Academy's nominating process. I think they're a bunch of hacks who nominate a lot of the movies for purely political reasons. But for like some random racing movie to get a bunch of nominations kind of piqued my interest a bit. Also, this didn't really look like a sports movie per se. It was more about the processes behind it, like what was going on behind the scenes, them building the car, the kind of the internal politics at Ford, the internal like the politics of international racing. It was more about kind of that and about the personality of the characters than like the sport itself. And the trailer honestly made it look pretty good, as someone who has no interest in car racing. So was it a good movie? Yeah, I thought it was a really good movie. I really enjoyed it. Before we get into like what it was about, I'd recommend it for just about anybody. You don't have to like sports. I don't like them. I don't have to like car racing. It's an interesting piece of history, and it's kind of an interesting look inside. I guess kind of like a couple things that people don't necessarily see much into. Um, so I got to say it's a good movie. So let's just kind of maybe talk a bit about the. So that being said, let's get into the story. So our story takes place in the 1960s, and Ford's been going through kind of a rough time. They aren't doing as well as they used to be doing. People just aren't buying cars. In particular, kids aren't buying Fords because they think of them as a dad car. I'd say they think of them as a boomer car, but they were the boomers when they were younger. So I don't know. They thought of them as a lost generation car. Anyways, so what they've come up with and what their marketing department came up with is that Ford needed to be cool. Ford needed the kind of coolness of something like Ferrari. They could still sell cars to the masses, like not everything had to be custom made, etc. But they had to make Ford into a brand that people looked up to and that was synonymous with kind of style, something that would make kids want to drive them. So their initial plan was to go and buy Ferrari, but that was just like a 4D chess plan by Enzo Ferrari to get Fiat to make him a better offer than they were initially going to do, because Ferrari at this point in time was bankrupt. So Fiat bought Ferrari, and Enzo Ferrari basically just made fun of Henry Ford II, calling him like fat and stupid, and trying to live up to his grandfather legacy when he in no way was anywhere near the man that his grandfather, obviously Henry Ford I, was. So this really pisses Henry Ford II off. So he gets his staff to go and recruit Carroll Shelby. Now, Carroll Shelby, played by Matt Damon, who does a really good job, was a former world champion American racer who developed a heart condition and so left professional racing, instead becoming a car designer. His company, Shelby American or whatever it's called, produced really expensive high-end custom cars. So that kind of became his business after that. So the combination of his racing experience with his knowledge of engineering like really high-end custom cars made him really attractive to Ford. So Ford approached him, and they basically gave him a blank check and said, "We want you to win to build us a car, and we want you to win the biggest race, from my understanding, in the world, the Le Mans 24 hour. I think, from my understanding, it's a race that happens in France that goes for 24 hours, and it's like the most prestigious one. I guess kind of like the Tour de France. I don't really know anything about these events, but that's at least how the So he brings on board Ken Miles, our second main character, played by Kristen Bale, who I guess you could describe as a crazy, limey bastard. He fought in World War II, I guess, like most males of his generation did. But he's really just nuts. I don't know if he has Asperger's or something, but he's just kind of he's a savant when it comes to building and driving cars, but he's kind of like a loser in most other areas. He's exceedingly weird and impolite and kind of a dick when he's dealing with most people. So he's like constantly getting himself into trouble. And he immediately pisses off like the number two guy at Ford, who for the rest of the movie, he kind of becomes the villain. And he's the guy who keeps trying to destroy him. And he's willing to like sabotage the entire race program. So we get a bunch of cool scenes of them building the car, which is something I wasn't really that like. Once again, cars and auto mechanics and that kind of stuff isn't something I'm really interested in. But in the case of this film, they make it very interesting and accessible, and then they kind of explain the process. It's all edited together very well, so it never gets like overwhelmingly technical or anything. And as someone, like I said, with no knowledge, I found I could pretty easily follow it and enjoy and understand what was going on. So they build the car, which is okay. They don't really have enough time to make it like super good. But the vice president, who really hates Miles, convinces them to leave him behind, and they go to the 24-hour Le Mans. And while none of them manage to finish, it does prove that their car is, theoretically at least, significantly faster than the Ferraris that they go up against. It should also be noted, I think by this point in time, Ferrari had like a 4 or 5 year winning streak at the race, and they were generally considered to be the best racing cars in the world, whereas Fords were kind of seen as being a joke. Shelby then makes kind of like a deal with Henry Ford, this Henry II, where like we have a cool scene of them riding in a car together at high G forces, and he says that he's wagering his company on Miles if they'll let him drive in the 24 hours of Daytona. If Shelby wins, then Miles gets to be the driver in France. But if he loses, Henry Ford gets his company, which seemed kind of weird to me. I don't know if that actually happened. That seemed like something they might have put in the movie for drama. But that's kind of, I guess, what happened in this movie. So, of course, Miles wins the Daytona, and he gets to be their driver in France. So the whole thing in France is actually pretty interesting. Initially at the race, Miles, it's kind of funny actually because his door gets stuck open, so he has to do a pit stop on the first lap, and he kind of starts getting lapped. But then he kind of quickly starts to pick up speed again. And we kind of have a bunch of, it's pretty intense in these races. A lot of the people seem to have like get killed or blown up, etc. I looked it up. I think something like only half of the people actually finish, or less than half actually finish these races. So a bunch of stuff happens during the race, and eventually Miles gets into a speed duel with the main Ferrari prototype, and the other driver tries to push his car as far as Miles is pushing his, but Miles's engine is inherently faster and can handle the higher RPMs better. So the Ferrari car's engine blows, and this means that all three Ferrari cars are now out of the race, and the top three positions are held by Ford cars. So the VP who wants to shut down Miles gives the order that Miles has to slow down because he's like, I think he's like 5 laps ahead of everybody else at this point. and wait till the other two cars catch up, and then all three Ford cars will cross the finish line at the same time. And it'll be this historic moment. It'll make a great picture. So Miles initially is against this. He sets a couple lap records and then gives up and slows down. So while all three cars cross the finish line at the same time, it doesn't count as Miles winning because his car was initially further forward when it started than one of the other guys. So he technically loses by like 12 feet in a 24-hour race or something ridiculous. So Shelby gets really pissed off about it, but Miles is like, look, you gave me a chance to race in this. It's what I always wanted to do. I know I won. And we get kind of a nice scene where Enzo Ferrari tips his hat to Miles. Once again, who knows if that actually happens. Then 2 months after their victory, they're working on building a newer, better race car, and it explodes and kills Miles, which I guess is what happened in real life, and it is kind of jarring, and Shelby kind of goes into a depression after it. So it goes on to say that Ford would win the Le Mans for the next couple of years, and I don't think they've won really since then. But yeah, it's definitely kind of like an interesting story. Like I said, they managed to make the racing really accessible. They do a really good job kind of editing it up into bite-sized portions. There's a lot of good like commentary, like they explain what's going on. They really do the best knowing that this movie is primarily going to be seen by people who don't have any idea like what it's even about. And we have excellent performances by Matt Damon and Christian Bale, and the guy who played the asshole vice president, and the guy who played Henry Ford II also did a good job. I think to me, kind of the other interesting thing about this was Henry Ford. I don't know if it really, because at the beginning of it, he was complaining that no one had any like ideas for him. And it seemed though he deliberately surrounded himself with sycophants and yes men and people who had no idea what they were doing. Like just kind of like professional managers who didn't really know anything about cars and didn't really care about it, whose job was just basically to kiss the current head of the Ford company's ass and just tell him that everything he was doing was brilliant. And that's kind of a very difficult position that a lot of rulers get into. You need to have a close circle of people around you that you can trust, but they also have to be competent and be willing to stand up to you and willing to tell you when you're wrong and willing to like try different things and make suggestions. And to me, it was, once again, I don't know how it worked historically, but in the movie, it was kind of like, he was kind of blaming the people around him for the situation he had obviously created. If he didn't want a team of sycophants with no original ideas, he shouldn't have hired a team of sycophants with no original ideas. Anyways, it was a good movie. I really enjoyed it. I'd recommend seeing it. There was no politics in it. There was no pause in it. It was just kind of a good old character story movie. Anyways, that's my review. God bless.